The slap was so loud that the entire diner went silent. 20-year-old Hannah Brooks sat frozen in her wheelchair, one hand trembling against the edge of the table, while a red mark slowly appeared across her cheek. The milkshake in front of her had spilled across the table, dripping onto the floor beside her chair. 3 young men stood over her laughing as if humiliating her were the funniest thing they had seen all week. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. And Hannah, who had spent years learning how to survive people's stares, whispers, and cruel jokes, lowered her eyes because she was already used to believing that maybe the world simply did not care. But what those bullies didn't know was that exactly 1 hour later, the doors of that little American diner would open, and a group of bikers would walk in. They would see Hannah's face, hear what happened, and remind everyone in that room that kindness was not weakness, and that sometimes the people who look the toughest are the ones with the gentlest hearts. Before we continue, if you believe that every person deserves dignity, kindness, and a second chance, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who believes in kindness, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps stories like this reach people who may need to hear them. The diner was called Maggie's Corner, a small roadside restaurant in the heart of Ohio, where chrome signs hung in the windows and the smell of coffee, grilled onions, and fresh pancakes filled the air. Hannah had been coming there every Saturday afternoon for almost 2 years. She always chose the same booth near the window because it gave her enough room to maneuver her wheelchair and allowed her to watch traffic passing outside. Hannah had been born with a condition that affected the muscles in her legs, and after a childhood filled with surgeries and physical therapy, she had learned to live independently. She worked part-time at a local library, studied online, and dreamed of one day becoming a children's author. Her wheelchair did not define her, but unfortunately, some people seemed determined to make it the first thing they saw. That Saturday, Hannah had ordered a chocolate milkshake and a grilled cheese sandwich. She had been having a difficult morning because an apartment application had been rejected after the landlord said the building was not suitable for someone using a wheelchair. She had cried in her car before entering the diner, but she had promised herself she would not let another rejection ruin her entire day. She opened her notebook and began working on a children's story about a little bird that believed its broken wing made it worthless. The irony was painful because Hannah secretly felt exactly like that bird. About 20 minutes later, 3 young men entered the diner. Their names were Tyler, Mason, and Cole. They were around Hannah's age, loud, careless, and clearly more interested in entertaining themselves than respecting anyone around them. At first, Hannah tried to ignore them. But when Tyler noticed her wheelchair, he nudged his friends and began making jokes. Mason laughed. Cole looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Hannah kept her eyes on her notebook, hoping they would lose interest. They didn't. Tyler walked past her table and deliberately bumped the wheel of her chair. Hannah looked up, startled. She politely asked him to be careful. Instead of apologizing, he laughed and asked whether she needed someone to push her around. His friends laughed again. A few customers glanced over and then quickly looked away. Hannah felt her face burn with embarrassment. She wanted to disappear, but there was nowhere to go. She gathered enough courage to tell them to leave her alone. Tyler leaned closer and mocked the way she moved her hands. Then he reached across the table and knocked over her milkshake. The glass shattered against the floor. Hannah flinched. The waitress, Grace Mitchell, hurried over and told the young men to stop. Tyler became angry and accused Hannah of being rude. Grace stood between them and asked him to leave. For a moment, everyone thought the situation was ending. Then Tyler slapped Hannah. The sound echoed through the diner. Hannah's eyes filled with tears, but she refused to cry in front of him. Grace immediately called the police, while another customer stepped forward. The 3 young men suddenly realized their laughter had gone too far. They hurried outside before officers arrived, leaving Hannah sitting alone beneath the harsh fluorescent lights. She stared at the floor. What hurt most wasn't the slap. It was the silence before it. She had always wondered what she would do if someone ever truly needed help. Now she understood the painful answer to a different question. What happens when you need help and everyone is afraid to become involved? Grace knelt beside her and gently placed a clean towel against her cheek. She apologized for not stopping the slap sooner. Hannah told her it wasn't her fault, but inside, she felt something breaking. She didn't want sympathy. She wanted to be treated like everyone else. Nearly an hour passed. The diner slowly returned to its normal rhythm, but the atmosphere remained heavy. Then the sound of motorcycles began rumbling outside. One engine, then another, then several more. Everyone turned toward the windows. A line of motorcycles rolled into the parking lot. Their riders wore leather jackets, helmets, and heavy boots. They looked intimidating enough to make the entire diner fall quiet again. There were 6 of them, led by a broad-shouldered man named Marcus Reed, a former mechanic who had spent most of his adult life riding across the country with a small motorcycle club called the Iron Guardians. They walked inside. The doorbell rang. Marcus took off his helmet and looked around for an empty table. Then he noticed Hannah. He noticed the red mark on her cheek. He noticed the broken glass still being cleaned from the floor. And he noticed that Hannah was trying very hard not to cry. Marcus didn't ask what happened immediately. He simply walked over, pulled out a chair, and sat beside her so he wouldn't be standing over her. His friends followed, their expressions becoming serious as Grace quietly explained what had happened. The biggest biker in the group, a quiet man named Raymond, clenched his fists when he heard about the slap. Another rider, Joseph, shook his head in disbelief. But Marcus raised one hand. He reminded them that justice didn't mean revenge. It meant making sure the person who had been hurt knew she was not alone. Marcus asked Hannah if she was okay. She nodded, although everyone could see she wasn't. He then told her something that she would remember for the rest of her life. He said that being physically strong meant nothing if you used that strength to frighten people, and that real strength was using whatever power you had to protect someone who couldn't protect themselves. Hannah finally looked at him. For the first time since the incident, she smiled. The bikers stayed. They ordered food, bought Hannah another milkshake, and filled the diner with ordinary conversation. They didn't treat her like a victim. They treated her like a friend. Raymond asked about her notebook, and when Hannah explained that she wanted to become a children's author, he told her that his granddaughter loved stories. Joseph asked what she was writing about, and Hannah reluctantly showed them her little story about the injured bird. Marcus read the first page. He looked up and told her that perhaps the bird wasn't broken at all. Perhaps it had simply survived something that other birds never had to face. Those words reached somewhere deep inside Hannah. The police eventually returned with information about the 3 young men. Because witnesses had identified them and security cameras had captured the incident, they were located later that evening. The case was taken seriously, and Hannah was given the opportunity to pursue charges. She did not want revenge. She simply wanted them to understand that their actions had consequences. But the biggest change happened inside Hannah. The next Saturday, she returned to Maggie's corner. She sat at the same table. She ordered the same chocolate milkshake. And she opened her notebook. This time, she didn't write about a bird with a broken wing. She wrote about a bird that learned to fly differently. Weeks passed, and the Iron Guardians began visiting the diner regularly. Hannah became part of their little circle. They never treated her differently because of her disability. They teased her about always ordering extra whipped cream, listened to her stories, and encouraged her to submit her writing to a children's publishing contest. Months later, Hannah received an envelope from a small publishing company. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Her story had been accepted. The little book about the injured bird would become her first published children's story. At the launch event, Hannah stood in front of a crowded room and looked at the people who had helped her get there. Grace was sitting in the front row. Marcus and the Iron Guardian sat behind her, wearing their leather jackets and looking strangely proud. Hannah knew the book wasn't really about a bird. It was about every person who had ever been told they were less because they were different. It was about the people who stayed silent because they didn't know what to do. And it was about the extraordinary power of one simple act of kindness. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who needs a reminder that kindness still matters, and subscribe to the channel. You never know whose life a simple message of compassion might change. And before the story ends, comment "Kindness is strength" if you believe we should never stand by when someone is being humiliated or hurt. Hannah never forgot the slap. But she also never forgot what happened 1 hour later. Because sometimes, life doesn't send angels wearing white robes. Sometimes, they arrive wearing leather jackets, riding motorcycles, and carrying hearts much softer than anyone expects. And sometimes, the person you thought needed rescuing doesn't need someone to save her at all. She simply needs someone to remind her that she was never alone. Hannah's wheelchair had never been the thing that made her strong. Her strength came from every morning she chose to keep going. Every rejection she survived. Every cruel stare she endured. Every tear she wiped away. And every time the world told her she was different, she quietly answered by becoming stronger. The bikers didn't change her life by fighting her bullies. They changed it by sitting beside her when she believed nobody cared. And sometimes, that is the greatest kind of rescue there is.